Hello everyone! For today, we are going to talk about the self from the various philosophical perspective. And as you know it, in this subject, we are going to use different lenses or different fields in the understanding of the self. That will be philosophical, sociological, psychological, physical, sexual, digital, economic, and even spiritual. So basically, we are going to take a look of the self in the various field of understanding. I am your discussant, Andy M. Ubido, together with my partner, Rosalie Armero, and we will be gonna discussing philosophy, the self from various philosophical perspective. Before we go into the deepening part of this discussion, let me read to you the learning objectives. At the end of this discussion, the students are expected to define philosophy, appreciate the contribution of each philosophical perspective on the understanding of the self, articulate the various philosophical views of the self, examines one's thoughts and experiences according to the philosophical views of the self, and lastly, propose an answer to the question, who I am. As part of this discussion, let's do this activity. The activity is entitled, Let's Talk About You. There will be 5 questions, and this will be an easy questions because it only talk about yourself. So now, let's start. What are your interests? Where do you excel? What are your skills that you considered as your assets? Number 4, how do you view yourself when you were a child? And how do you view yourself when you become an adult? Lastly, these experiences really matters for you in shaping your identity and yourself. The activity is all about, it is not just about accessing the factual information about ourselves, but it is also about distinguishing what makes us unique and individualize us from the rest of the humanity. All of a sudden, this will come up to the real question, who I am. The activity taught us to take time to know ourselves better and deeper than anyone else. At this point, the next slide will be all about for you to find out what is philosophy. So I hope you will able to get your pen and paper to take note because it will be essential for you in understanding for the next succeeding discussion.
The prefix philo means love, and the stem Sophia means wisdom. So philosophy is love of wisdom. Here, love means more than just positive emotion or affection. It means desire, longing, searching, or striving for something absent.
Philosophy is the love of wisdom. It is a field of science that investigates reality and human existence. Philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world in which they live, and their relationships to the world and to each other. It includes the study of proper behavior and the search for wisdom. When someone studies philosophy, they sometimes want to understand how and why people do certain things and how to live a good life. Other times, the study of philosophy is to seek out the ultimate nature of existence, reality, knowledge, and goodness. In simplest terms, it is the search for knowledge and truth, especially about the nature of man and his behavior and beliefs. It is the reasoned inquiry into all such matters and has been an ongoing aspect of society within all world civilizations.
Based on the video, give a word or a phrase that is connected to the word philosophy. A word or a phrase you will do in order for you to accomplish this part. Here are the possible words that are connected to the word philosophy based on the video we've watched and based on the internet if you've researched. So we have here philosophy, art, rational, thoughts, literature, abstract, science, enlightenment, study, mind, brain, knowledge, and many more. So if you're able to see it, it is what the words that are connected to the word philosophy. What do we even mean by the word philosophy? Philosophy comes from the two Greek words, philos and sophia. Philos, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Philosophy is the study of knowledge or thinking about thinking, because philosophy is all about asking questions and answering a specific question. Philosophy refers as the love for wisdom, and soon applied as the study of discipline that uses human reasons to investigate the ultimate causes, reasons, and principles which govern all things. We called philosophers or lovers of wisdom who engage in the study of philosophy. And these philosophers are pioneers in the fields of knowledge such as history, biology, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and even physics.
Who am I? This question is one of the most difficult to answer and has garnered attention right from the start of self-reflection. What do we even mean by the self? Are we souls? Are we another's imagination? Are we just minds? Or a combination of body and mind? In this video, selected philosophers' answer to the question will be presented.
Attempting to answer the question who I am will enter the idea of what is philosophical perspective of the self. At this point, let's define it. Philosophical perspective of the self is defined as the study of acquiring knowledge through rational thinking and inquiries that involves in answering questions regarding the nature and existence of man and the world we live in. Basically, philosophical perspective of the self is understanding and defining ourselves in the context of the philosopher's view. So at this point, in the ancient time, since the ancient times, until the postmodern discourses, many philosophers grappled to understand the meaning of human life. They have attempted to answer the question, who I am, and most of their views have influenced the way we look at our lives today. The following are the discussions of the different perspective and understanding the self according to the philosophers of the ancient times to the contemporary world. We have Socrates, Plato, Augustine, René Descartes, Gilbert Ryle, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, John Locke, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Sigmund Freud, the couple, Paul and Patricia Churchland. Let's start the discussion with the first philosopher, the philosopher John Locke, a British philosopher, politician, and physician, the father of liberalism. A trivia part, John Locke is called as the father of liberalism because his works paved the way to several revolutions to fight the absolute powers of monarchs and rulers of his time that led to the development of governance, politics, and economic systems that we know at this time. So John Locke's proposition all about the understanding of the self. Locke opposed the idea that the only reason is the source of knowledge of the self. He said that self is comparable to an empty space or tabula rasa, which means a blank slate. Para kay John Locke po, ang kinukumpare niya ang isang bata na pinanganak ng walang alam. It is compared like a cotton band, a clean paper. And that's why experiences is an important requirement in order to have a sense of data through the process of reflection and analysis, eventually becomes sense of perception. So sinasabi po ni John Locke na tayo ay pinanganak ng walang alam sa mundo. Tayo ay pinanganak ng inosente. Kaya kinumpare niya tayo sa isang malinis na papel na walang sulat. And ang ating mga experiences, ang ating mga karanasan sa buhay, ay ang siyang magbibigay ng hubok ng ating pagkatao. That's why he said the self is comparable to an empty space or tabula rasa. According to John Locke, we will shape our identity through our experiences. The sense of data is categorized by John Locke into two. We have the primary qualities and the secondary qualities. Primary qualities contains numbers, solidity, figure, and motion, while the secondary qualities contains color, odor, temperature, and other distinguishable elements that are subjective. According to John Locke, the validity of sense perception or our experiences is very subjective. Do you think why? Because perception is changing from an individual to another. Ibig sabihin po, may magkakaiba tayong approach sa bawat bagay or sa bawat experiences or sa isang sitwasyon. For example, in a situation that you've received a message from an unknown number, the message contains, "Congratulations, you win 1 million." A person A and person B have different approach on that matter. May magkaiba tayo kung paano natin i-handle yung situation. For example, si person A, magmamadali siya kung paano niya maklaim yung prize, kung paano siya magkakaroon ng pera. And the person A, magiging masaya. While the person B maybe says, "Oh, kasinungalingan lang to. This is just a scam." So, given that situation, we're able to come up to the idea that perception is very subjective. May magkakaiba tayong approach sa bawat bagay and sa bawat experiences. That's why our experiences define who we are, define and how we shape ourselves. The next philosopher is philosopher David Hume. David Hume, a Scottish philosopher and historian known for his empiricism and skepticism. When we say empiricism, all knowledge is derived from the human senses. These human senses are the sense of sight, taste, hearing, touch, and smell. Empiricism is said to be causes and effects are discovered not by reasons but by experiences. And now we have skepticism. Doubt as to the truth of something. You are doubting to a specific claim. You are asking and you are not contented with the facts and the information being given. You are doubting for that claim na meron pa siya, meron pang idadagdag, and you are asking a specific questions about that claim. Next thing, David Hume claimed we cannot be persistent about the self. We can never be persistent about the self because all we know about ourselves, all we can observe on ourselves are just temporary. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng magbago at nagbabago. All ideas are derived from impressions. Ano ba tong sinasabi nating ideas and impressions? Impressions, vivid, products of direct experiences. Ibig sabihin po, ito ay na-experience natin, nararanasan natin with the use of our five senses. When we say ideas, ito naman yung mga naiisip natin na mga bagay na product of impressions or the copies of impressions. Ito yung mga gusto nating mangyari. Ito yung nagpa-pop up sa idea natin, sa mind natin, that this is what I want to happen. That is ideas and impressions. I hope you get it. David Hume is very known for his claim that all we know about ourselves are just bundle of temporary impressions or the bundle theory. In so much thing we wanted to be persistent to the self, constant and stable, Hume says it is impossible. As long as we only derive our knowledge from sense impressions, there will never be the self. Perhaps this supports the difficulty of answering the question, who I am, because all we can answer are just impressions. And that's led to the claim of Hume harshly claimed that there is no self. The question is, how did Hume derive from this claim? Hume derived to the claim that there is no such thing called self because, for him, the concept of self is just an illusion. We can never be the self and have the self if we can experience it. Ibig sabihin, kailangan natin munang ma-experience para mabuo natin kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng self. And now, the major philosophical works of David Hume impacts bigger and influence the lives today. A book, A Treatise of Human Nature from 1739 to 740. The book or the Treatise of Human Nature has 3 books. The book 1 with the title of The Understanding. The book 1 discusses in order the origin of ideas, the ideas of space and time, knowledge and probability, including the nature of causality and the skeptical implications of those theories. For book number 2, of the passion describes an elaborative psychological machinery to explain the effective or emotional order in humans and assigns a subordinate role to reasons in this mechanism. And book number 3 on morals. On morals, characterize moral goodness in terms of feelings of approval or disapproval that people have when they consider human behavior in the light of agreeable or disagreeable consequence either to themselves or to others. The next philosopher is Immanuel Kant, a Prussian metaphysicist who synthesized the rationalist view of Descartes and the empiricist views of Locke and Hume. Kant's proposition, self is always transcendental. Self is always transcendental prior to your experience. To fully understand the self, a certain level of consciousness or sense that uses our intuitions, which synthesize all the experiences, impressions, and perceptions of ourselves, will pave way to define and know who we really are. Kant's philosophy, transcendental unity of appreciation. In his theory, he explains that being the self is not in the body. It is outside the body and even outside the qualities of the body, meaning transcendent. Transcendental unity established the notion of the self by synthesizing one's accumulations of experiences, intuition, and imagination. We not experience but still be able to become aware of. We are the one constructing the self. Kant rather argues that even we eliminate everything, or in the case of Descartes, doubt everything, there will be still space and time that will remain on us. For example, in this, the idea of space and time, may we not able to observe the movement of the time and the vastness of the space, but we are still capable of understanding their concept based from what we can observe as their representation, and that reflects the transcendental unity of appreciation by Immanuel Kant. What is the main point of Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant wanted to say us that our rationality unifies and makes sense the perceptions we have in our experiences and makes sensible ideas about ourselves and the world. To clarify this, the idea of the self are not only an object that perceives and reacts to whatever it is that we are experiencing. We also have the capabilities to understand beyond those experiences and be able to think and have a clear identification of who we are. Sigmund Freud, an Austrian psychoanalyst, he regarded the self as the I that ordinarily constitute both the mental and physical actions. Freud sees the I as the product of multiple interacting processes, systems, and the scheme. Sigmund Freud sees the self as the multi-layered, and he proposed the two models, the topographical model and the structural model. The topographical model. The topographical model is the individual person may both know and don't know certain things at the same time. Freud's solution to this predicament is to divide the I into consciousness, unconsciousness, and preconsciousness. These are the level of awareness of an individual. Topographical model. So at this point, we will be discussing the three levels of awareness of an individual. We have the conscious level, preconscious level, and the unconscious level. Let's start with the conscious level, governed by the reality principle. Take into account the realistic demands of the situation. When we say reality principle, these are you are being aware of what is happening in your society. You are being governed by the principle which enters the idea of the ego. So in the consciousness level, you are being aware of what is happening to your society and you're being able to be a responsible and accountable in all of your actions. Next thing is the preconscious level. Contains material that is not threatening, located between your consciousness and unconsciousness level, which means that the preconscious level is the balance between these two levels of an individuals. Lastly, The unconscious level. The unconscious level, governed by the pleasure principle, characterized by a primitive level of human motivation and contains basic instinctual drives. When we say pleasure principle, this is a principle wherein when you feel something that you need this, you want this, it needs an immediate satisfaction. So that is the topographical model. We have conscious level, pre-conscious level, and the unconscious level. Structural model. The structural model contains three parts or three layers. First is the id, ego, and the superego. Let's start with the id. The id is the primitive and instinctive part of the mind that contains sexual and aggressive drives and hidden memories. The id is being governed by the pleasure principle. Commonly, we can see the id to an infant child. In a situation when a child feels hungry, he needs food. Therefore, he is being driven by the id because an id needs an immediate satisfaction. Next thing is the ego, the realistic part that meditates between the desires and the id and the superego. Freud sees ego as the I, and the ego is being governed by the reality principle. You are basically expected to act on a socially acceptable manner. Commonly, it is the time wherein you were able to build your conscious level. You are starting to be aware what are the wrongs and what are the correct things to do based on the set norms of the society. And lastly, the superego operates as the moral conscience. Freud see the superego as the above I. So at this point, at the superego, you are being ruled by the idea of what is wrong and what is right. So at this point, I want to ask you this question. Do you think what makes a healthy person? A dominated id, a dominated ego, or a dominated superego? If your answer is being dominated by the ego, well, you are correct. Because if you are being dominated by the id principle or by the id model, you are being a person being dominated at all. You wanted to have a life that is when you feel something you want this, then you will get it. While if you are being a super ego dominated person, it will be a boring one because all needed you to think to do is act based on what the people wanted. And if you will be an ego dominated person, you have a healthy living. You're able to balance the id and the super ego matters. Structural model. Flash on your skin is an example of a situation where you can easily understand the structural model, Freud's theory of the personality. For a situation of you are wanted to something to do, an I will tell you, I want it now. For a superego, you can't have it. It's not the right time. For the ego, I need to do a bit of planning to get it. If we were able to analyze this example, an I is being governed by the pleasure principle. You are able to act na, kailangan ko tong ma-fulfill because I want this. While the superego, you are acting based on conscience. You are acting that I should not do this because it is not right. And you are able to being dominated by your conscience that this is bad and this is should I not did. For the ego, you are being balanced. You are being dominated by the reality principle. You are able to think a way in order for you to act based on a socially acceptable manner. And I hope you're able to understand the Freud's theory of the personality. Paul and Patricia Churchland, a Canadian philosopher and the couple Paul and Patricia Churchland. The couple Churchland promoted a position called eliminative materialism, which brings forth neuroscience into the force of understanding of the self. When we say neuroscience, define the self by the movement of the brain. It is the study of the nervous system, specifically the brain. It is where we get the senses. For the Churchlands, the philosophical and psychological directions will eventually be abandoned only to be replaced by more acceptable trend in the neuroscience that provides explanations of how the brain works. Eliminative materialism. The radical claim that our ordinary, common sense understanding of the mind is deeply wrong and that some or all of the mental state posited by common sense that do not exist. To clarify the idea, it is a belief that nothing but matter exists. This physical brain exists, not the mind. Eliminative materialism directly attack against the folk psychology. When we say folk psychology, common sense psychology, a notion in terms being used to explain behavior or to explain how a person feels, thinks, and acts with regards to psychological phenomena that is happening in the body as well as definition brought by emotions. Eliminative materialism, it is not remotely impossible that the folk psychology will be replaced by neurobiology or the involvement of science in the understanding of the self with the use of understanding the brain. The church lands wanted to predict when people wanted to ask what's going on with themselves. They might as well as to go to MRI scan or a CT scan to understand the present condition of the brain and how it currently works. So, what is the main concept of eliminative materialism? Opposes that people's common sense of understanding of the mind is false, and the mental states that the mind are into are not existing. Applies the understanding of behavior and emotion rather than conceptualize the neurophilosophy. The main point of the church lands as an advocate of eliminative materialism. The self is inseparable from the brain. All we have is the brain, and so if the brain is gone, there is no self. The physical brain and not the imaginary mind give us our sense of self. The mind does not really exist. The self is the brain.
Good day everyone, I am Rosalie Armero from BS Ed Science 1 and I am tasked to discuss the human philosophy. Since the ancient times until the postmodern discourses, many philosophers grappled to understand the meaning of human life. They have attempted to answer the question, who am I? And most of their views have influenced the way we look at ourselves today. The dictum, know thyself or self-control as we hear today, is an ancient greeting of a highly civilized Greeks. Knowing oneself is only about measurable facts that pertains to a self such as age, height, color, blood type, or basic facts. To know thyself, it is first an imperative and a requirement. So imperative refers to the limit of the self so that one knows what one is capable of doing and what one is not. So imperative refers to our weaknesses and our strength. It is a requirement for the self-moderation, prudence, good judgment, and excellence of the soul. It is just a wise then to put oneself in a moderation so that one is capable of a self-control. To demonstrate the dictum, here are some philosophers along with their philosophies in knowing our true self. Starting with Socrates. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher who proposed a very emphatic philosophy. Socrates narrates that the unexamined life is not worth living. This is perhaps the most satisfying philosophical assertion that Socrates claimed in order to protect human beings from shallowness of living their lives. Living a good life means having the wisdom to distinguish what is right from wrong. Socrates further argued that the unexamined life is no better than of animal life. What Socrates only trying to say is that we should not be contented on the things that are only given to us. We should explore and gather more information and should not fear by not trying. Socrates rightly pronounced that I know that I do have knowledge. Socrates was the wisest among the philosophers. For Socrates, only in the recognition of one's ignorance that a person can truly know oneself. Socrates also believes that a man is a combination of body and soul, or every human is dualistic. Next, we have Plato. Plato was influenced by the wise pronouncement of Socrates. Plato proposed his own philosophy of the self. He stated in the examination of the self as a unique experience. The experience will eventually better understand the core of the self, which he called the psyche. For Plato, psyche or soul is composed of the three elements, namely the acquisitive, the spirited, and the mind. He refers to these elements as the nous, which means the conscious awareness of the self. So the three components of the psyche are the appetitive, or the element of the psyche that includes one's desire, pleasure, physical satisfaction, comforts, and etc. Next, we have the spirited. The spirited is part of the psyche that is excited when given challenges or fights back when agitated or fights for justice when unjust practice are evident. This is also the hot-blooded part of the psyche. Next is the mind. The mind considers as the most superior of all the elements. He refers to this element as the nous, which means the conscious awareness of the self, and it decides, analyzes, thinks ahead, proposes what is best, and rationally controls both of the appetitive and the spirited elements of the psyche. In addition to the list, we have Augustine, or also known as Aurelius Augustinus Hypotenensis. He provides another concrete example of the highly self-controlled nous, which was proposed by Plato. Augustine was unsettled and restlessly searched for the meaning of his life until his conversion to Christianity. The development of the self for St. Augustine is achieved through a self-presentation and self-realization. He was not afraid to accept himself and tell the people about his sinfulness. To St. Augustine, man's end goal is happiness. Christianity is the full and true philosophy. It is the full revelation of the true God. Augustine also believes that our body dies on earth. Our soul lives internally in spiritual bliss with God. Next, we have René Descartes. René Descartes is the father of modern philosophy. Descartes claimed that we cannot really rely on our senses because our sense perception can often deceive us. Example, there are times when we hear something where in fact there is nothing, and that we are only deceived by our sense of hearing. Everything must be subjected to doubt according to Descartes, or if something is so clear and lucid as not to be doubted, that's the only time one should believe. Then Descartes said that cognito ergo sum, or this is translated as I think, therefore I am, or I doubt, therefore I exist. Only after the certitude of the doubting I can all the other existence, God or the universe or the things and the events become certain. So the human rationality, simply put, we need the reasons in order to evaluate our thoughts and actions. We need the reasons in order to establish firm foundations for universal truths and morals. So we need reasons in order to exist and continue to survive. Descartes also believed that the body is a machine that is attached to the mind. It is the mind that makes the man. So, next we have Gilbert Ryle. Gilbert Ryle is a British philosopher who proposes positive view in his concept of the mind. It started as a stern critic of Descartes' dualism of the mind and the body. So he said that the thinking will never be found because it is just a ghost in a machine. It means that he finds the philosophy of Descartes totally absurd. So he proposed that physical actions or behavior are dispositions of the self only be able to understand the self, based from the external manifestations, behaviors, expression, language, desires, and the like. The mind, therefore, is nothing but a disposition of the self, so the mind is never separated from the body. Ryle continued that the mind will depend on how words are being told and expressed and delivered. All the manifestations of the physical activities or behavior are the disposition of the self, the basis of the statement, I act, therefore I am, or you are what you do. Lastly, we have Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He is a French philosopher. His philosophy, the phenomenology of perception, draws heavily from the contemporary research, Gestalt psychology, and neurology. He developed a kind of phenomenological rhythm that is composed of three dimensions. For Ponty, self regarded that the body and the mind are not separate entities but rather those whose two components is one and the same. Coined the idea of phenomenology of perception, or the unity of the function of the mind and the body, which is divided into three divisions, namely the body, the perceived world, and the people and the world. The body receives the experiences as well as the integrates such experiences in the different perception. The perceived world is the accumulation of the perception as integrated by the experiences of the body, and the people and the world enable one to not only be able to integrate the other objects in the world but also to be able to experience the cultural aspects and relate to others. One's actions, behavior, and language use could be said to be the reflections of our united perception of the world. What Merleau-Ponty proposes is treating perception as a causal process. It simply means that our perceptions are caused by the intricate experiences of the self and proceed intellectually while distinguishing truthful perceptions from illusory. Therefore, the self is taken as a phenomenon of the whole Gestalt understanding of the perceptual. In conclusion, this section discussed the philosophical perspective of understanding the self through historical approach. In the ancient and medieval times, we have identified the self as the perception of the soul. To achieve this requires a self-examination and the self-control. In the modern period, understanding the self is recognized in the dialectic synthesis between rationalism and empiricism. Contemporary philosophy takes a wide variety of theories in understanding the self. In the end, we realize that we are not yet done in answering the question, who am I? Although we already have achieved a lot in our philosophical reflections about it, we continue our quest for understanding who we really are.
Summary of the topic. Philosophy comes from the two Greek words, philos, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Philosophy is the study of thinking about thinking. It is refers as the love for wisdom, and soon applied as the study of discipline that uses human reasons to investigate the ultimate causes, reasons, and principles which govern all things. Philosophers, or lovers of wisdom, are the people who engage in philosophy. Philosophical perspective of the self is the study of acquiring knowledge through the rational thinking and inquiries that involves in answering questions regarding the nature and existence of man and the world we live in. Since then ancient times until the past modern discourse, many philosophers grappled to understand the meaning of human life. These philosophers are Socrates, Plato, Augustine, Descartes, Locke, Hume, Kant, Freud, Ryle, Churchland, and Merleau-Ponty. John Locke's proposition is self is comparable to an empty space or tabula rasa, which means a blank slate. David Hume harshly claimed that there is no self. All we know about ourselves are just bundles of impressions. Immanuel Kant says that self is always transcendental, that paved way to his philosophy the transcendental unity of appreciation. In his theory, He explains that being the self is not in the body. It is outside the body and even outside the qualities of the body, meaning transcendent. Our rationality unifies and makes sense the perceptions we have in our experiences and makes sensible ideas about ourselves and the world. Sigmund Freud believes that the self is multi-layered. Freud proposes two models, the topographical and the structural model. The topographical model is all about the individual person may both know and don't know certain things at the same time. Freud's solution to this predicament is to divide the I into three levels of awareness. That is, consciousness, unconsciousness, and the preconsciousness. While the structural model represents the self in three-dimensional fundamental structure or agencies. These are the I, the ego, and superego. Paul and Patricia Churchland promoted the position of eliminative materialism, or the self is inseparable from the brain. All we have is the brain, and so, if the brain is gone, there is no self. The physical brain and not the imaginary mind give us our sense of self. The mind does not really exist. The self is the brain. Socrates is one of the philosophers who manifested the interpretation of the dictum, know thyself or self-control. Thus, this affects the way we look at ourselves today. Moreover, Socrates claims that person is dualistic. It consists of body and soul, and left the famous quotation of the unexamined life is not worth living. Gilbert Ryle proposed the concept of the mind. He believes that the mind is never separate from the body and come up with the concept of ghost in the machine. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, a French philosopher that introduced the philosophy of phenomenology of perception. He proposes the treating perception as a causal process. Thus, our perceptions are caused by the intricate experiences of the self, and intellectually, while disgusting truthful perceptions from illusory. As the last part of our discussion, reflect to the following guide questions. Number 1. What do we even mean by the self? Number 2. Are we souls, bodies, or fragments of someone else's imagination? Number 3. Are just minds or a combination of mind and body? Number 4. Will I survive bodily death, or is it the end when my bodily self die? And lastly, am I a robot controlled by some entity? The main purpose of understanding the self is to find happiness. An understanding of self therefore affirms a person's identity in a social environment, allowing him or her to recognize others besides oneself. In other words, the way human beings socialize solely depends on the way they perceive themselves and others through daily social interaction and how they shape themselves. We can never define anyone else because it is to them who decides about what they want to be, how they view themselves, and in the same manner they can define us. The self is unique for each individual who lives and breathes under the same sky at the same time. Thank you, and that's the end of our discussion. Hope a great day to you.